So good morning or good afternoon if you're tuning in from Asia. I'm Fraser Cameron, the Director of the EU Asia Centre, and welcome to this webinar on EU-India relations. Pleased to have today a very good panel, including Caroline Vinot, who's the Director for India, the European External Action Service, Shada Islam, who's a Senior Advisor at the EU Asia Centre, and also recently has just set up a new project, Global Horizons Project, and with a very interesting website. And from India, Samir Saran, who's the President of the Observer Research Foundation, India's leading think tank. Now, I have a few questions coming in, but you're also available to send in questions via the link, which you see on the side of your screen. And we will make this a very active, interactive panel. Going to kick off by asking Caroline, who was very involved in preparing the EU-India summit last week, to give her assessment. Then a second segment will be looking at India's foreign policy. Samir will lead on that. And a third, Shada will lead on India's immediate neighbours. So Caroline, 15th EU-India summit on 15 July. It seems from what I read to be a very successful summit. But maybe you could just give us your views on what were the highlights and where we go from here, because there's also a roadmap to look forward in EU-India relations. Caroline.
Thank you, Fraser, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues in Delhi. Very happy to be here and participate to this webinar. So indeed, it was a very good summit. As you know, it was initially scheduled for March. We had to postpone it a few days before the foreseen date due to the COVID. There was a mutual commitment on both sides to reschedule the summit as soon as possible. When it became clear that it was not going to be possible in a near future to schedule it in physical presence, it was very soon decided to hold it via VTC. So VTC does not allow the personal interaction and the informal part of a meeting as you have during a regular summit when people meet and but nevertheless, I mean, it was decided of a common agreement to make it a real summit and not just a VTC to discuss, you know, COVID response globally or bilaterally, but to use this time and this meeting to bring the bilateral agenda forward and continue to progress in the implementation and the strengthening of this strategic partnership which we have established since 2004 between EU and India. So there has been quite a lapse of time between the last summit in 2017 in Delhi and this summit. As you may remember, there was a lengthy electoral process in India, followed by a lengthy electoral process within the EU and time to for the new teams to settle. But the idea in the EU was to have a very early summit with India, also as a signal that it's an important partner for the EU in Asia. So that's why we were all very happy to see that it was possible to significantly progress, even via VTC, with a substantial list of deliverables or substantial deliverables for this summit. So as you have seen, we have adopted a real joint statement, which we had started to negotiate in February, March, and which we updated and continued to negotiate in the run-up to this July summit. And it's important that this joint statement not only addresses COVID response at the bilateral and multilateral level, but also the bilateral agenda on trade, on sustainable modernization, on climate change, on digital economy, on connectivity, on human rights, mobility, so all those issues which are covered in the joint statement. And as you mentioned, Fraser, we have adopted this new work plan, which is a 5-year work plan, the Roadmap 2025, which is quite detailed, covers the whole range of our bilateral cooperation, and which sets the ambition and the goals for the cooperation, development of the cooperation in the next 5 years. Apart from that, we have also adopted a new joint declaration on resource efficiency and circular economy, which comes to somehow complete the overall dispositif which we have in our bilateral cooperation to support the sustainable modernization of India, which is part of, let's say, the contribution of this strategic partnership between EU and India to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, since this sustainable modernization aims at supporting the economic and infrastructure development of India in line with the overall objectives of adaptation and reducing the emission of greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gas. So this latest joint declaration sets the framework for a further cooperation on circular economy, which is very dynamic and functions well between EU and India. Among the deliverables in the trade sector, we have not significantly progressed towards the relaunching of a free trade agreement. You all are familiar with this issue, which was already discussed in 2017, but there was an agreement to launch a high-level dialogue on trade and investment, which we see as an important step to establish a platform for political communication from both sides in order to provide guidance to the bilateral discussions, relations, in order to improve, build confidence, and improve the overall relationship and cooperation on trade and investment towards a future FTA, which remains the long-term objective. We have also signed a new agreement, cooperation agreement on peaceful and civilian uses of nuclear energy. This was signed between the Euratom on the EU side and the Department of Atomic Energy in India. It's quite important because as I had the opportunity to mention, it's the first time that we signed such an agreement with a non-NPT member, and therefore it's also a sign of willingness to engage and confidence in a way. It's very much focusing on research in areas such as medicine, not only but mainly, and that's a quite a good new step. We have also some ongoing discussions between Europol and their counterpart in India for increased cooperation on security matters. It will in particular be useful once we have a working arrangement to combat organized crime together. So there is this trend of really continuing to develop the relationship and the cooperation in many strengths of its components, and to deepen the existing tracks for cooperation. That's the case on climate change and energy. That's pretty much the case also on security matters, as you might have noticed. This is addressed in the joint statement, and there is a significant, quite substantial section in the roadmap also that follows the latest visit of HRVP Borrell, who was accompanied by the chairman of the EU Military Committee, who both participated to the Raisina dialogue in January and had meetings with the National Security Advisor, with the Minister of Defense, with the new Chief of Defense Staff in India. And there is here also a commitment on both sides and an interest on both sides to work more together on security cooperation. So I think this is also a very positive outcome of the summit. So this is where we stand today. The next step will be to implement this ambition work program, and that's what we are already starting to work on. And we will have a discussion today in Coreper with our ambassadors to see how we take this ambitious work plan forward. And I'm very much looking forward to hear your comments and suggestions from this prospect.
No, that's a really good overview, Caroline. Samir, it's a pretty optimistic viewpoint from Brussels. How is it viewed from Delhi, the relationship?
No, I think, so thank you, Fraser, for inviting me, and thank you, Caroline, for the overview that you provided. You were intimately engaged in the process, so I think your thoroughness of your presentation reflects that. My view is going to be one at the 40,000 feet level and another at the working level. I think at the 40,000 feet level, we are still disappointed. I think both the countries still don't understand, both the regions, the European Union and the Indian Union, don't appreciate and understand the meaning of the word strategic. I think we look at transactional and tactical elements and start projecting that as being part of a document which should be far more ambitious and forward-looking. And I did not see the look ahead in the document. I saw a lot of emphasis on what is already happening, the tracks that are running, strengthening existing work, incrementally expanding cooperation, looking at certain new areas with great hesitation, but we failed to address the three big questions that the world community today seeks to respond to. First, how do you manage a world in which China is increasingly expansive and aggressive? And we did not hear any conversation around this most important question. No one wants China to disappear from the world. All of us want China to be responsible and contribute, actors that contribute to world peace, prosperity, and growth. We did not discuss the management of the elephant that is no longer in the room. It is all over us. So I think the first part that I found missing and lacking in the document was any degree of congruence. We failed to address China when we spoke about regulatory coherence in the digital sector, in the technology sector. We failed to address China when we spoke about Indian Ocean and possible security cooperation. We failed to address China when we speak about trade and trade regimes. We talk about democracy and values and rule of law and human rights, and we have mentioned that in the document, all the 4 words, but we ignore the trains that the Chinese are running. Now, for a European continent that has experience of trains running with people, not to speak about it is shocking, and it is something that is very unsavory. European Union wants to be a participant in the Supreme Court of India, where there is a battle on India's own domestic laws, which are considered discriminatory by some, which the Supreme Court is hearing the matter of, and the European Union has become a participant in that process. But the Union has still not found vocabulary, words, and grammar to talk about Chinese action that trample on rights, on human freedoms, on democracy, and on other similar actions. So I think the first, we are not addressing the biggest question that the world has to respond to, a multilateral order where China is going to be either G1 or G2. And how do we, as other powers, ensure that there is stability and we are able to defend what we have created over the last 7 decades? The second big question is on decoupling. And I think there was some mention in the health part of the declaration that we want to have sensible supply chains for critical items, etc. But I think we are still not reimagining boldly on how do we build supply chains where we have political trust and where democracy and rule of law prevails. So we are still not addressing the decoupling that is inevitable and the recoupling that will follow. And do EU and India want to partner together in the recoupling that follows, or has European Union and its constituents made up their mind that Chinese is a good bet to make, and they are making that bet? And I think that's something that's lacking in this document. And the third and final issue that I think where I believe we are lacking ambition is on climate change. Now, the current Indian Prime Minister, who's now in his 2nd term, has continuously emphasized his personal ambition around the green agenda. In fact, so much so that just before he was going to meet his counterpart in the US, and when the US had announced withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, the Indian Prime Minister speaking in Paris, speaking in Germany, reaffirmed Indian commitment, decided to expand Indian commitment. Now, what is it that we really need on climate change? We need big pools of money to be invested into green transitions. And I think what is lacking in this document is the way to make this happen. How do we get large capital, commercial banks, European pension funds, European insurance funds, and the large pools of private capital that lies available in the old world to invest in green transitions in the new world? We crib about the Belt and Road Initiative. We complain about loans being given to infrastructure and projects and coal plants, but we are not yet offering an alternative, a green financial pathway to the future. And I think we need more ambition between European Union and India there. These are the three big questions that I found we were either not addressed or insufficiently addressed in a document. Perhaps because of the digital format, we had to be careful. We were all experimenting with digital summits for the first time. We have to be more modest in what we can get out of it. Maybe a face-to-face consultation, a more active travel of foreign ministers and dignitaries and bureaucrats before the meetings might have resulted in greater ambition. But I think these are three areas we must partner. The good news is that India is acutely aware of the European Union. I think in my 2 decades of engaging with the subject, I think Indians and India, and this is beyond just the political circuit and beyond just the journalist circuit, I think larger Indians today understand EU than they have ever done. And there's a great potential to use that to our advantage. The images that are coming out of EU, unfortunately, are not very coherent at this moment. And I think we need to somehow find ways of escaping our current trepidations and aiming for bigger.
Okay, well, it's interesting. The three areas you mentioned are all being covered by questions that have come in. And obviously, I think Caroline will wish to respond to some of your comments. But Shada, first, what's your take on the summit and the relationship overall?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fraser, for having me on this panel as well. Great to see Samir and Caroline there as well. I'm going to just start with where Samir ended, and he said how Indians and India is understanding Europe. And I think I've been watching this relationship for many decades. And what's interesting is how Europe is beginning to really understand India as well. So it's a mutual path and journey that's been undertaken by both sides. I think what we're seeing now is good geopolitics at play. And I say good because it's about partnerships and cooperation and not just about confrontation and zero-sum games, which I think, we indulge in much too often. Now, on the bilateral side, I think Caroline has pointed to all the major sort of breakthroughs. But for me, watching this and having seen, Fraser, the impasse in this relationship for many, many years, where really there was frustration among think tankers and like ourselves that this relationship was not moving forward. I'm really pleased that we do have now this counterterrorism cooperation between Europol and the Central Bureau of Intelligence in India. This is something the Indians have wanted for a very long time and did not get it. And now we have this breakthrough. The Euratom Agreement on Civilian Nuclear Cooperation, something that India has been asking for decades, really, is gone through as well. Now, there is, of course, great disappointment, but seriously, we didn't expect it, a breakthrough on the free trade agreement or the investment situation. That was not on the cards. That negotiation has been stalemated for 12 years or so. So there was no expectation there, but setting up this high-level dialogue where, people can meet, ministers can meet and discuss the very serious obstacles that still exist, I would say on both sides. I think that will clear up the air. And I don't see an FTA, Caroline, you know me on this, I don't see an FTA coming in the near future. We have to focus on the beyond FTA. But what really strikes me is the multilateral framework. And Samir, I don't agree with you about the elephant all over the place not being part of this discussion. It was very much so. And I think it hangs there. But in diplomacy, the European Union also has a relationship with China, with Korea, with Japan, with the ASEAN countries, India as well. So we're expanding, if you like, our outreach into Asia much more constructively, much more actively than ever before. And believe me, I've been very frustrated and critical of the EU in its lack of engagement with Asia in the past. So when things do matter and happen, I do want to give compliments on that, and I do want to acknowledge it. For me, the multilateral role that India, if it wants to, Samir, if India wants to play this role on the multilateral stage of actually working together with the European Union to reinforce a very fragilized multilateral rules-based order, extremely fragilized, not just because of China, but also because of the United States and the lack of engagement of many others. The European Union is struggling to try and reform the WTO. It would be great. if India could join forces with the EU to do that. We have an opportunity now with the new Director General. Can India and the EU come together and agree that it should be an African, and of course an African woman? I say of course because there are 2 candidates. On the WHO, India is in the executive board at the moment. Is there something that we can do together to make sure that the vaccines that we are trying to develop are made accessible to all and not just hoarded by the rich, as the Americans would like? We're also in the midst of, I hope, a recovery. The European Union has just struck a rather historic deal on its new budget, but also its recovery fund. Many lapses there, gaps, but still it's there. Can we make sure that India and Europe work on the global stage to ensure that there's a recovery, including through keeping markets open and including in relations within the G20, where India is, of course, a very important member and will be chair, I think, in another few months. And finally, on connectivity, the Belt and Road Initiative has been mentioned, but we all know it's not just the BRI. Once again, we're obsessed with what China is doing. There are other connectivity projects and initiatives. Let's bring them under a multilateral frame, because that connectivity will be a great fiscal stimulus. And in this recovery, when we're looking for jobs and growth, I think we should work together. So I see this in a much more, let's say, long-term journey. We're not there yet. And obviously, Samir, India is part of our network of Asian countries with which we're engaging. It's not the only one. So we have to find a balance there as well among our relations. Thank you, Fraser.
Thank you, Shada. That's good. I think, Samir's point about the restrictions of the virtual framework are probably part of the answer, because in these summits, often it's over dinner or over drinks when you can discuss the most sensitive issues, and China's obviously a pretty sensitive issue here. So I think, Caroline, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think reading between the lines in the summit communique, there is actually a look at the elephant that may not be in the room when you talk about Indian Ocean, freedom of navigation, etc., etc. But you please respond to Samir's points about China decoupling and climate, and then we'll move back to Samir for the broader foreign policy issues.
Yeah, maybe to start with, thank you very much, Samir, to keep us alert and to shake the tree, if I may say. It's very useful for us to have interlocutors of your level who want more and who express disappointment because you want to see more happening and happening as a result of our high-level meetings. It's very encouraging, as Shada says, and as you also point out, it's a good news that there is an appetite for more in a way. At least I take it as a very positive point. At the same time, indeed, well, first of all, in these times of high disruptions at global level, not just the sanitary context, but it's very much part of it also, we need to build stability. And as I said, this summit, which was initially foreseen as the first Asian summit for the new European leadership, which was significant also from a political perspective because of values, because of democracy, some form of like-mindedness. It was important indeed that we could have a discussion which enables to build the contact. I think we need to see this summit as a first step for the next 5 years. And from this perspective, it was a successful exercise because the contact was good, the discussion was very friendly, it was very frank also, and it helped very much to understand each other's points of view, be it on climate change, where obviously India is facing its own challenges, and that is very much under the framework of the Paris Agreement, also, which acknowledges that the national circumstances are different and that needs to be taken into account, or on digital, or on trade, or on multilateral issues. What is important indeed is that throughout the joint statement and throughout the roadmap, but even more the joint statement, there are the things which one can read between the lines, where you don't necessarily need to, name the elephant in the room or everywhere, but we felt that it's necessary to indeed strengthen the links, build the basis, the grounds for a stronger cooperation on all of these issues where we do have common interests and common concerns. On digital, you might have seen in the joint statement that we have decided to upgrade the dialogue on technology. There is a strong interest on both sides to engage at a high level, at a political level, on building a cooperation and a mutual understanding, not just on standards, but on the key challenges for the future, be it on artificial intelligence, on 5Gs, and this will be taken up at a higher level. Similarly, on connectivity, in the joint statement, we refer to a connectivity partnership. There is a lot of interest on the Indian side since the EU has published its own strategy for connecting Europe and Asia. And it will take time necessarily because we need to put all the actors together, define what do we want to do, what is needed, what can be useful. But there is a common understanding on the challenges there and on the need to work much more together on that. You might have seen also in the joint statement that there are indeed a lot of messages on multilateralism, the United Nations, the reform of the WTO, which do answer somehow to some of the concerns, Samir, which you raise. And finally, I hope you have not you have seen that the joint statement refers to the Indo-Pacific region, as you know, and that is in the context of the connectivity cooperation. But it also goes together with a very strong message on further cooperation on security and defense and further cooperation in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific region. So we are slowly getting there. I'm glad that the feeling in Delhi is that it's not enough. I think we need to all work on that, and your work as prominent spokespersons, if I may say, of the think tanks and the academics is to help us to continue to build this dialogue, this open and frank dialogue, and to work more towards cooperation. But we all know that we, both on EU and in India, we are slow animals, if I may say. It takes time to put everybody, in line, and it takes time to establish the personal contacts, to then, work on the issues. I think Shada is very right when saying that the FTA was not so much expected, or we did not expect a breakthrough on that. We were hoping, and we all worked on that, both on the Indian side and the EU side. But the positive point is that it has not become an obstacle to further development of the cooperation. And I think now with this statement and with this new high-level dialogue, we have good ground to work on towards more economic integration in the future. Over.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Well, there's a few questions, Samir, which you could maybe take up as we move on to more India foreign policy. I mean, one you've already mentioned, the prospect of a G10 involving G7 plus India, Australia, Korea, obviously in some kind of containment of China, I think is the context. Another question about the Quad, which you might say something to. Where is that going? What does India want to see from this? And also, how attached is India to the current Trump administration's views of China? So these are a few questions that have come in. Maybe you could work them into your reply.
No, I think I neither disagree with what Shada has presented, nor with what Caroline has said. I think I was giving you a ambitious assessment of the future of the relationship, not a modest assessment of our current gains. I'm not denying that we've moved a long way, and that was my concluding sentence, that in my 20 years, this is the closest we have been as unions. So that is something that must be understood. But my I'm going to transit into the questions, Fraser. But my ambition and my disappointment thereof stems from the fact that I truly believe that if we want to have a semblance of a liberal order remain with us for the rest of the century, the European Union cannot neglect the normative power that it is for a tactical power that it wants to be. And I fear that the politics of convenience within the union is forcing it to shed its value-based ethic. And it is becoming more Indian, and India is moving towards a norm-based framework. So again, we are going to miss the bus. As we move towards norms and values, you are becoming more American. Now, my point here is that you were the empire of norms, and people used to, in a sense, use it not necessarily as a complimentary description. But the fact is that we have all come to realize that there is a value to those norms. And if we want to defend the norms, there has to be a custodian of those, of that ethic. And can EU be that custodian, or just to please its partners in Asia? And Shada was not looking at pleasing any other partner than China here, because the Japanese and Koreans and others don't think differently to what the Indians think. It is basically to please China if you're going to stop the defense of values and norms, if you're going to ignore the happenings in Xinjiang and some other places in China, or Hong Kong, or for that matter, their expansiveness in other countries. Are you truly defending the European Union, or are you becoming a different beast? And then let's negotiate on that basis. So I think European Union remains at its core best, or core, rooted to its core cause, if it is a empire of norms, and we must not forget that. And you are the ones who tell the rest of the world to stay the course. Don't lose the course yourself. And that's my point I'm trying to make here. That you come and tell us that our CAA is not good or some other policy is bad. Guess what? There are other countries who are doing far worse. We need a spine sometimes to stand up to them as well. Talking to a country which is 1/6 the size of your GDP is not that difficult. Talking to a country which gives you economic benefits is far more a challenge. And I think that's my point I'm trying to make here. On India being attached to Trump's China policy, actually no. Trump has no sense of India's China reality. Trump does not have a undefined border with China. He doesn't have thousands of kilometers of contested space with China. He doesn't have a country that is trying to steal your territory. He doesn't have 3 divisions of the Chinese army standing on your border. He has not had a bloody clash in the valley where soldiers on both sides lost lives. So India's China assessment and China policy is not based on Trump's policy. On the contrary, India has to be far more vocal in explaining China's conduct and nature to the world. And I think we perhaps need to do more there. We have to start explaining China to the world, rather than being in a position where we are trying to discover China through other people's lenses. Sorry, no one knows China better than us, right? So I think Trump will not decide India's China policy. Our border does, our trade does, our history does, our current and present experience does. So our China policy is based purely on India's assessment of China, and it is a difficult relationship. Now, there is an asymmetry in this relationship. The Chinese are multiple times bigger in their economic footprint and a few times bigger in their military footprint. But that does not mean that we still will build our strategy to manage this relationship based on our partnerships alone. India will have to carve out a unique independent China policy, which it has, and it will have to make it attractive enough for others to participate in. Now, some of the activities are going to be easily sellable. For example, as Caroline mentioned, that can be built together a large pool of funds to create infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. Rather than cry about BRI or cry about any other project, can we become proactive, and can we create a infrastructure program that actually does things the right way? Similarly, can EU and India become the harbingers of the new digital Magna Carta that is bound to happen? Can we put forward a digital regulatory framework for the future? Can we partner together in the open working group where the new cybercrime conversations are happening? Can we become the anchors of the future tech, the global coalition around AI that's been currently built up? Can we promote connectivity and digital connectivity frameworks and norms? So I think there is India's future policy will have certain hardcore military and tactical questions in which certain partners cannot participate, but it will also have a large economic and social and political footprint in which many countries should sometimes lead, sometimes partner with, sometimes join. And I think that is bound to happen. On the Quad, I think Quad is changing every day. I think Quad has been shaped by Chinese actions. I think China has done more for the Quad than the Quad themselves. The Quad was a reluctant grouping. It had middle-level conversations. It had some military conversations, but it was largely non-existent until China's expansive behavior. And now suddenly China has infused life into the Quad. So I would argue that many of the Indo-Pacific coalitions that are coming up, the Australians are looking at a network of technology, a technology network coalition in that region. The Japanese want with the Americans, they're building an infrastructure fund. The Indians are trying to create a infrastructure investment framework. So all the countries are beginning to put together ideas, many of which are driven by careless, egregious Chinese behavior. And I think in that sense, you will not expect the world not to respond to stimuli. The Chinese are offering a certain kind of stimulus, and that is being responded to. But our core concern as a country remains building up our GDP over the next decade and a half. We have to lift millions of people from poverty. We also have to move hundreds of millions of people from low income to low middle income and middle income. So our nation building project is paramount. And our international relations and foreign policy provisions are going to be serving this nation building project. I think no government in India can ignore the huge human capital investments we need to make, the social infrastructure investments we need to make, the roads and bridges and ports and electricity plants, etc., that we need to create. I think these will be paramount. So we will partner with the Gulf countries to get sovereign funds to invest in infrastructure projects. We will partner with the Japanese to build certain kind of projects. We will work with the Americans and the Europeans for certain other kind of projects. We are completing our 20th century project even as we are undertaking the 21st century project. So the opportunity and the need framework for India at this time is huge. We need all sorts of partners. And we certainly did believe until a certain point of time that the Chinese could be a core component of our own growth transformation story. Now it is becoming increasingly difficult to accept China as a trustworthy partner. You cannot do trade with a person who seeks to harm you. You cannot give economic benefits to a person who will use that money to buy arms to kill you. I think that is foolhardy and that is impractical. And therefore, I think you're going to see some changes because this has happened only over the last few years, 2 or 3 years, that we have seen this new Chinese foreign policy emerge, expansive policy emerge. India will be seeking new forums. India will be seeking new kinds of partnerships to cater to its domestic priorities, to keep its region stable and safe, and to maintain peace. China's rise cannot come at the cost of instability. China's rise has to be moderated by others so that our own growth and livelihood aspirations are not disturbed. And that's my only proposition.
And before I move to Shada to comment on this, the specific question, where does India stand on 5G, Samir?
India stand on 5G, like on many other issues at this stage is ambiguous, but I will be surprised if the Chinese are betting on being a part of it. I think I can just tell you from my own personal experience. I wrote a pretty strong article recently where I've used the term "no way Huawei," and it has been quote tweeted by a minister in the government. And I assume that at least at this time, the mood in this government is not to have the Chinese participate in 5G. In fact, some of the 4G work has also been cancelled. That included Chinese companies, and I would be really surprised if China finds any space in India's key technology sectors going ahead. I think India is going to do to this particular decision that it has taken what it did with the BRI. We don't mind being alone. we will make it popular. We were alone when when everyone was present in the court of Xi Jinping. India was the lone man not there. Today we have many other partners who are willing to question the BRI and its full efficacy and its design and its transparency and its impact. I think our decision to reject digital China should be made into a national endeavor and should be internationalized. We should go to countries and explain why Chinese apps are bad. We should explain why Chinese critical technology is bad. We should create alternatives. India is building its own alternatives, and hopefully we will be one of the solution providers and not just a solution taker.
Thank you very much, Samir. So Shada, maybe in commenting on what Samir has said, you could also broaden it to other parts of South Asia, which you have been following for years. So please.
Right, I will, but Samir, what you've said is extremely interesting. What I find a little dismays me really, and I've seen this often with colleagues in India, it's always this constant comparison with China. In the past, it used to be, well, long ago with Pakistan. India is a very important country in its own right. The EU is engaging, has been trying to engage with China, with India and China for many, many years. And it is not just because of the rise of China that this relationship is taking off. It's one of the reasons, but it's not the only reason. Your market, once it fully develops, is a very, very attractive market for European investors and exporters. It just isn't there yet. But Europe is banking and investing in a future where it can really be a strong investment and trade partner and a security partner with India. And I think I find it, you know, we do that a lot, but I prefer to look at a country and see its strengths and its weaknesses. And obviously you're in a neighborhood, and obviously China looms large over across the world, and especially over India at the moment. Obviously there's conflict as well in the Himalayas. So I can understand this preoccupation. I think a number of countries have it. The European Union does as well. I think the EU, as you said, you're trying to find your own way without falling into the binary trap between the US and China. The European Union is doing exactly the same thing, trying to find its own way in this very, very prickly atmosphere, very geopolitically tense atmosphere. So no one can deny, and neither have you, Samir, that India and China also partner in many areas. I think China is a big investor in Indian technology and Indian startups at the moment. Are you going to cut off your nose to spite your face in that area? Big exports go to China as well, as does European exports to China as well. So we're trying to find a middle ground where you are a partner when you need to be, and you are a strategic you're a strategic, I was going to say rival, competitor is the better word, but you're a strategic competitor as well. The key for me is this cooperation going to be, is this competition going to be cooperative, benign, or is it going to be confrontational? And there China has a big thing to say. Does it want to cooperate and compete, or does it want to just compete in a confrontational way? That's in their court. Let's wait for them to come back to us. The talk about G10.
Can I just make a quick point? I'm sorry, I did not suggest in any ways that the European Union has to partake in our political contest with China. In fact, I made it quite clear that amongst a number of foreign policy priorities, there are some military and political, there are some economic and infrastructure related. European Union can choose where it wants to partner with us and stay away from where it doesn't. So I don't expect the European Union partnership with India to be defined by it being on the Indian corner. Of course, it would help if you don't do two things that you've done consistently, both in this conversation and earlier. I think there is no equivalence between US and China, and I hope European Union stops making it. I think the US may be going through pangs of democracy. It may be an imperfect democracy, but the American people will choose a political future for themselves. And as the pendulum swings in various democracies at various times, American political system is likely to be a net positive contributor to global stability. Similarly with India, we may have our problems, we may have our own imperfect democracy, but equivalence with China, I think, is rather diminishing of a certain kind of nations, and I hope the European Union stops doing it. I keep hearing this about some sort of an equivalence between the US and China in your decision making. There isn't. US is are good people in a bad mood, in a bad moment in democracy. but they are good people. Now,
Okay,
in Chinese, people don't matter. Only the regime does. And that's the difference. And I hope that in India and the US, Indian commentators do this all the time. That why should we, US and China are both like this? No, they are not the same. They are not the same. The US allows it.
Let me go back to Shada.
No, I think thank you for making that point. I mean, we can talk about US China. This is not the issue here at the moment. I just wanted to say the G10, Fraser, that you talked about as well. Well, I don't agree with G10. I think we should really just put this G7 in the dustbin and start afresh. We have other fora. The G20 is one of them. Let's invest in that. India is now going to be chair of G20. It can perhaps give it a bit more of a institutional oomph and do that. Now, one of the things that I do worry about is the state of, so we've talked about China ad nauseum. Let's move to the neighborhood. And one of the things that's always worried me, and Caroline knows that, is that, of course, South Asia is a very, very, let's say, weakly integrated, even from the economic and trade side, and that, of course, is a big weakness in Asia. So you have ASEAN and you have other countries working together in regional frameworks. In the South Asia Association Agreement, SARC, is really absolutely weak, and I fear that neither India nor Pakistan or others are investing in it. But I think in today's world, and we've seen this with the decoupling, the reshoring, this debates, everything is going to be regional. And I worry that South Asia, of course, India can stand on its own, but the other countries in South Asia will not have the kind of backing that ASEAN has, or Mercosur has, or even the African Trade Union, the African Free Trade Area has. We won't have it in South Asia. So what I worry about also, and Samir, would be quite interesting to hear your point of view, the relationship with India and between India and Pakistan is again at an all-time low. Allegations of spying, allegations of breach of Vienna Convention put by diplomats, Twitter attacks at the highest level, and of course media also joining the fray and making things worse. And it's been years and years of this, and I wondered to what extent India can stand up proudly on the world stage, as it should, I believe, if it doesn't have a neighborhood where it is at peace. And I always ask my Indian colleagues that, why are we not investing as much as we should in creating, I'm not saying a trouble-free, but at least sidestepping some of the key issues and working on trade, for instance, working on investments or people-to-people discussions. That, I think, is a big, I don't know, Caroline, if you agree, but if we look at South Asia, it's a big weakness. It's a systemic weakness, and puts South Asia back compared to many other regions of this world.
Okay, let me ask Caroline to comment on that before we go back to Samir.
Thank you. Maybe before moving to the South Asian region, a last word on China, to comment on what you said, Samir. If you look at the press statement which was issued by the EU leadership after the EU-China summit in June, it's quite clear. I think we can't be more explicit. We clearly say that cooperating and engaging with China is an opportunity and a necessity, but at the same time we have to recognize, and I quote, that we do not share the same values, political systems or approach to multilateralism. We will engage in a clear-eyed and confident way, robustly defending EU interests and firmly or standing firm on our values. Then there has been a number of statements on Hong Kong. So I think I can try, at least, Samir, to reassure you on the fact that the EU remains faithful to its identity and to its DNA when it comes to dealing with China on the basis of mutual interest, notably on some global challenges, but also standing firm on its values. And the fact that the summit, has not has not been followed by significant statement, cooperation agenda, and so on, is also a sign that we need to assess where we stand in our relationship with China and how we take it forward. And I think there are a lot of commonalities on that between the EU and India. And as I said, a number of sectors where we decided to strengthen our bilateral cooperation with India is also a response to this assessment of the state of play at the regional and at the global level. When it comes to the sub-regional situation, we do share the same analysis that it's dramatically not integrated. One could say also within India there is a need for strengthened or higher level of integration. There has been some progress in the past years, notably at the fiscal level. Our response is, joint projects with the EIB at the regional or sub-regional level, notably in the field of infrastructure, in particular on energies infrastructure. But I assume that when we will start engaging on the preparation of a connectivity partnership between EU and India, we will also have to precisely to dwell on those issues. Are we going to work on the intra-regional, infra-regional connectivity between India and the European Union via third countries, notably increased cooperation in Africa, for example, where there is an interest from both sides? And we started to engage on this issue, and there's a lot to do. We have very complementary interests and bases, if I may say, geographically in Africa. And of course, and this is something which we had the opportunity to discuss, including in the margin of the Resina dialogue, not in 2020, but in 2019, when we had this discussion with our heads of EU delegations in South Asia and Central Asia, which were all gathered in Delhi in the margin of the Resina dialogue, and your minister, who was then not yet a minister, participated to this meeting. There is a huge potential for increased connectivity between EU and India via Central Asia. But of course, I mean, there is a major deadlock, which is a relationship with Pakistan and the situation in Afghanistan. And there is still a lot to do, but you know much more than I on this particular issue. Thank you.
Samir, there's a question just on that point. As India is the largest, most influential power in South Asia, should it not be doing more to help integrate the continent, the subcontinent?
I think I kind of totally endorse what both Shada and Caroline have said in terms of the absolute shoddy state of connectivity between the countries in the region and within the countries in the region. I think Caroline is right. India first needs to do a free trade agreement with itself before it can connect with the region and the world. I think India needs to connect India. We need to build our own infrastructure to reach different spaces. But having said that, I would argue that Indian leadership until say the very recent past, and I would include the first term of Prime Minister Modi as well, I would argue that the previous 3 prime ministers and a few before the in fact, the previous 5 or 6 prime ministers have all staked a significant part of their political capital on trying to make things work with Pakistan. I think all of them have sometimes gone beyond their own political briefs and mandates within their parties to wish for having breakfast in Amritsar, lunch in Lahore, and dinner in Kabul. So I think that whole romantic notion of an integrated South Asia is an Indian concept. It does not flow from outside. It comes from Indian Prime Minister's office. Prime Minister Modi himself on his inauguration sought to invite all the regional leaders in his swearing-in ceremony to create that mood and moment for integration. So I think at the top leadership, we have seen intent, but I am not sure we have done enough to make it happen. And this is not only a lapse that can be attributed to just the lack of resources and investment capabilities in the region, but I also believe that there is a perverse political tides in different countries that have not allowed for that perfect moment when Pakistan and India were both ready to do the deal. I think we've seen the countries ready at different moments, and of course you will have to agree that again, while we have to find a solution, there is again very little equivalence between the regime texture in Pakistan and the regime texture in India. They are two different regimes. There, as Dr. Shashi Tharoor says, you have an army that owns a state. Here you have a state with an army. Now, how do you do a trade agreement when you have such two remarkably different political systems? Yet, I think being the largest country in the region, having the largest stakes in peace and stability and prosperity for the future, India must continue to be creative and find ways to convince all its neighbors, and certainly Pakistan more specifically, because I think with the others things are slightly different today, that having at least a functional relationship is a rational decision for all regimes to make. I think there has to be an effort made. I think it is something that requires urgent attention. India is certainly investing in its other neighbors. I think India has upped its investments in Bangladesh. India is supporting Sri Lanka. India has worked in Maldives. India has invested a large part of its budgetary capabilities in Nepal as well. Now, all of these countries also are political entities, and they have their own moments, and we all struggle to keep the tempo and the flow going. But I have no doubt that Pakistan is the big challenge. India-Pakistan relations are the big challenge for the region to emerge. The Bay of Bengal community is going to have a much stronger future than the Arabian Sea community. And I think that's something that we need to address, because unfortunately, as Caroline mentioned, the idea of a greater Eurasia, which is not shaped by China alone, Europe and Asia, the supercontinent, which is not shaped by the Chinese Belt and Road alone, is only going to emerge if India and Europe can become two anchors of a connectivity project, which is ambitious and bold. And we will have to build that European-Indian connectivity, which will engage many countries that are today problematic, be it Pakistan, be it Iran, be it Afghanistan. We have a few challenging geographies to resolve before we can truly become neighbors in our future.
Samir, we're coming to an end. I just want each of you just to, in 1 minute, to give me what you think should be. We have a long wish list, if you like, between EU and India, what we should be doing together. What do you each think should be the top 2 or 3 priority areas? Without going into any explanation, just give us a sort of a quick assessment, telegraphic. Shada first, then Caroline, then Samir.
Yeah, I'll start with connectivity. I think this is going to be, and it is already, the issue of the day. So really working together on a multilateral framework for connectivity projects going to be essential for a fiscal stimulus across the world. And that's where the money is going to be. So, you know, working with the banks, but working with governments, working perhaps on a plurilateral level even within the WTO. My second point would be connectivity among people. And Caroline, I've said this to you many times before, you know, we really need to upgrade and invest more in the think tank academic world, but also students and journalists together, because these exchanges are very important. And we kept the fires burning when EU-India relations on an institutional level were rather, let's say, weak, to say it. And finally, one thing that's always intrigued me since the beginning of this year is that the EU is now going outside Delhi, beyond Delhi, engaging with states and cities. And I think this is the new future of foreign policy, and building links is not just state to state and central government to central government. India does it with us, comes and talks to the Germans and to the French, etc. And I think it's important that we do the same thing. So for me, those are the 3 key points going forward.
Thank you. Caroline?
Well, very much in line with what Shada said, but bearing in mind that we need to build stability in our relationship. I'm quite optimist. I'm more optimist now than I mean, it was still a challenge 3 years ago because we went through this long period without dialogue, without real relationship. I think now we have really solid ground, solid base to continue working. But for this, we really need to have continuity at the highest level, a real dialogue between the ministers and the commissioners, be it on trade, be it on climate change, on digital issues, at the level of the leaders, naturally, and the experts in the ministry, starting with the Ministry of External Affairs. And we all had the opportunity to discuss already that the issue of the high turnover within the Indian administration, and somehow in the European Union, and unfortunately I'm a very bad example because as some of you already know, I will be going back to Paris in September, so somebody else will have to continue to carry this EU-India relationship dossier forward after me, but I will remain engaged and very much interested. But so the continuity in the engagement and the commitments will be very important. And I think there is a lot to do in the sphere of digital. It's enormous. The potential is enormous. And the challenges at the global level are enormous. It's a high priority for the EU, it's a high priority for India. And at this point, we have very, very much common approach in terms of standards, in terms of values, in terms of how the whole digital economy should be organized, and based on principles and respects for values. And on this, we will be very much paying very much attention to the work of the Parliament in India on the law on data protection. There is huge potential.
Move on.
There is a huge potential for a data adequacy decision that would be a major step forward, but we need to make sure that the data protection will be ensured in this process. That's
okay.
that
Samir, final comment.
I'll be short. I'll be brief, Fraser, because I think I hog too much time anyways. So let me first just thank Shada for her stellar contribution to the relationship. She is right. She was the face of Europe when we didn't have the official meetings this frequently. She and her colleagues in Brussels were holding the torch, carrying the flag for the partnership. I must thank Caroline and best wishes for your next posting. You've done a stellar job promoting this relationship, and I wish you could have stayed another 5 years and taken us home. And my thought is actually going to be at a more philosophical level. I think my appreciation of Europe is very deep. I am a believer in EU. I believe in the project. I believe it is a template for the world to emulate. And I believe we have to infect the world with the EU ethic of working common ground, finding solutions, and maintaining peace and stability without having armies posted at the border of each country. For me, the question before both of us as democracies and as relatively liberal and plural societies. I don't want to make any absolute statements in this world. 2020 will surprise us. So I'm saying relatively liberal societies. I want both of us to understand that we are in the middle of a project that has never been undertaken. We have never had a world which has been multipolar and multilateral. We've had a multilateral world which has been underpinned by either a single superpower or two superpowers. We are at a moment when there is no one willing to take that role, play the role of that superpower, of that irresponsible actor which will underwrite multilateralism. We will have to build a robust coalition of other actors who will help us tide this period of this uncertain multilateral moment. And for me, there is no better partnership than the EU and India to fill in the void as both the G1 and G2 seek to destroy the world in their own respective ways. So we will have to have other people step up and take responsibility. And I hope our partnership, EU and India, can provide stability for a digital world, for the old world, for infrastructure, for connectivity, and certainly for liberal values, democracy, and human rights.
Samir, that's an excellent way to wrap up what I think everyone will agree has been a fascinating discussion. Let me join Samir and no doubt Shada too in wishing you, Caroline, all the best in your new job, and thank you so much for all you have done to push forward the EU-India relationship. I think that the issues we've discussed today are going to still be on the agenda over the next couple of years, and we'll continue to look at them. But this is our last webinar before the summer break, so we will be back in September. Meanwhile, thank you all for watching. Thank you, Shada. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Samir. Have a great day and stay safe. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.